There is a moment that often feels quiet on the outside but seismic underneath. The instant a narcissist realizes they are losing their grip on you. It may come when you stop explaining yourself, when your reactions flatten, or when your attention no longer orbits their needs. To you, it can feel like exhaustion or clarity. To the narcissist, it registers as something far more alarming, a threat to psychological survival. This is not heartbreak for them. It is not sadness. It is a psychological emergency. Narcissistic control is not about love or connection. It is about regulation. You have been a source of stability for their fragile internal world. When that source is threatened, the narcissistic system does not move toward insight or repair. It moves toward defense. And defense in this context means escalation. The loss of narcissistic supply triggers panic at the level of identity, because without control, their carefully constructed self-image begins to fracture. This is where many people get confused. They expect maturity, remorse, or some form of accountability once it becomes clear the relationship is ending. Instead, what often emerges is a sudden intensification of manipulation. The narcissist is no longer trying to keep the relationship healthy. They are trying to keep their ego intact. That distinction matters. What you are witnessing is not chaos, it is strategy. This is the moment captured in the theme. The moment a narcissist knows you're done, they reveal their dirtiest final move. That final move is not accidental, and it is rarely subtle. It can include rewriting history, attacking your character, recruiting others to discredit you, or destabilizing you, emotionally just enough to pull you back into self-doubt. These behaviors are not signs of passion or pain. They are signs of control slipping. For targets who do not understand narcissistic patterns, this phase can feel shocking and deeply disorienting. You may question whether you misjudged everything, or whether you are somehow responsible for the sudden cruelty. But this phase is predictable. It follows a pattern seen again and again when narcissistic control is threatened. Awareness is critical here, because confrontation often feeds the very system you are trying to escape. Understanding the psychology behind these last-ditch maneuvers allows you to step out of the emotional crossfire. When manipulation, character assassination, and psychological sabotage begin to surface, they are signals, not that you are wrong, but that the narcissist knows you are no longer under their control. When a narcissist senses loss of control, what is activated is not grief over a relationship, but terror at the level of identity. This distinction is essential. For most people, the end of a relationship registers as sadness, disappointment, or loss. For a narcissist, it registers as annihilation. Their sense of self is externally constructed and continuously propped up by validation, attention, compliance, and emotional reactions from others. When that supply begins to dry up, when you become less reactive, more independent, or emotionally unavailable, it is experienced not as separation, but as a direct hit to the ego structure that keeps them psychologically intact. This is what clinicians refer to as narcissistic injury. It is not a bruise to self-esteem, it is a rupture in the false self they rely on to function. The narcissistic self is rigid, brittle, and defended at all costs. When you stop playing your assigned roles, soothing them, admiring them, fearing them, or centering them, the illusion starts to crack. And once that crack forms, the narcissist is flooded with shame, helplessness, and a profound sense of exposure. These are emotions they are not equipped to process. Instead of reflecting inward, the narcissistic system immediately looks outward for containment. This is where panic enters. The urgency you may feel coming from them, the sudden barrage of messages, the dramatic declarations, the unpredictable mood swings, are not signs of love rekindling. They are signs of a destabilized ego scrambling to regain equilibrium. The narcissist's internal experience becomes frantic. Control must be restored now, supply must be resecured, the threat must be neutralized. There is no pause for empathy or accountability because the internal alarm is blaring too loudly. As this panic intensifies, behavior escalates. You may notice a sharp increase in contact after periods of indifference or neglect. Messages become more emotional, more extreme, or oddly theatrical. They may oscillate between charm and cruelty, affection and accusation, vulnerability and intimidation. This emotional volatility is not random. It reflects the narcissist cycling through tactics to see which one still works. Anything that previously elicited a reaction is pulled off the shelf and amplified. Another common marker is exaggerated displays of power. When control is slipping internally, the narcissist often compensates externally. They may flaunt status, success, new relationships, or alliances. They may suddenly appear confident, dominant, or dismissive in ways that feel performative rather than grounded. This is not strength, it is overcorrection. The narcissist is trying to convince themselves and you that they remain superior, desirable, and untouchable. The louder the display, the more fragile the internal state tends to be. Erratic contact patterns are also telling. You might experience late-night messages, impulsive apologies followed by rage, or sudden crises designed to pull you back into engagement. These behaviors are driven by an inability to tolerate emotional uncertainty. The narcissist cannot sit with the idea that they no longer matter to you, that they are no longer central. Silence from you becomes unbearable because it mirrors the internal emptiness they work tirelessly to avoid. It is important to understand that none of this is about reconnection. Love does not require domination, panic, or manipulation. What the narcissist fears most in this phase is exposure, being seen as irrelevant, powerless, or ordinary. Your detachment threatens to reveal that their influence was never inherent, only borrowed, and that realization is intolerable. So the system reacts by attacking the source of the threat rather than examining it. This is why independence is so destabilizing to a narcissist. When you stop seeking their approval or reacting to their provocations, you are no longer feeding the narrative that they are essential. You become evidence that they are not. That evidence must be destroyed or discredited. The panic response pushes them toward increasingly destructive coping mechanisms because subtlety no longer works. The old tools, charm, guilt, intermittent kindness, lose effectiveness, and desperation sets in. What often confuses targets is the intensity of this phase. It can feel sudden and disproportionate, especially if you have been emotionally disengaging quietly for some time. But the narcissist does not register gradual change the way others do. They notice it only when control is no longer reliable. That is when the internal collapse accelerates and behavior shifts dramatically. This psychological trigger, the moment they know you are no longer tethered, activates survival mode. And in that mode, the narcissist is not trying to save the relationship. They are trying to save the self they believe cannot exist without dominance, admiration, or control. Everything that follows is organized around that single goal. When a narcissist senses that control is not just weakening but permanently slipping, manipulation enters a more concentrated and urgent phase. This is where hoovering and last-ditch tactics emerge, not as spontaneous expressions of emotion but as calculated attempts to pull you back into orbit. The goal is not intimacy or repair. The goal is to reestablish dominance quickly before your clarity hardens into distance. Hoovering in this phase often looks different from earlier cycles. It is more intense, more dramatic, and more confusing because the narcissist is no longer testing boundaries. They are trying to override them. You may suddenly receive messages filled with affection, apologies, or declarations of insight that seem to come out of nowhere. They may reference shared memories, private jokes, or moments of closeness that once felt meaningful. This nostalgia is not accidental. It is designed to soften your resolve by activating emotional memory, making you question whether the good moments outweigh the harm. Alongside this, manufactured crises often appear. The narcissist may suddenly be in danger, unwell, overwhelmed, or on the brink of collapse. These situations create urgency and pull you back into a caretaking role. The underlying message is subtle but powerful. If you leave, something terrible will happen, and you will be responsible. This tactic is especially effective with empathic individuals who are conditioned to respond to distress. What is important to recognize is that these crises tend to surface precisely when detachment becomes real, not during the months or years when genuine repair could have taken place. False remorse is another common strategy. The narcissist may articulate apologies that sound specific, emotionally intelligent, and even self-aware. They may acknowledge behaviors you have long tried to name, suddenly validating your experience in a way that feels relieving. But this remorse is performative. It lacks consistency, follow-through, and accountability. It exists to reopen the door, not to change the structure of the relationship. Once control is regained, these insights often vanish. Sudden vulnerability can be particularly destabilizing. Narcissists are adept at presenting fragility when it serves a purpose. You may hear stories of childhood wounds, loneliness, or fear of abandonment that were never previously shared. This vulnerability is not offered to deepen connection, it is offered to bind you through empathy and obligation. By positioning themselves as wounded, the narcissist shifts the dynamic, making your boundaries feel cruel rather than necessary. Love bombing can also reappear in this phase, often in a more urgent and exaggerated form. Grand gestures, promises of change, and intense affection may return briefly, creating emotional whiplash. This resurgence is not a reset, it is a surge. It is meant to overwhelm your nervous system and disrupt your clarity. When emotional intensity spikes, rational evaluation tends to drop, and the narcissist is counting on that imbalance. Fear is strategically activated as well. They may imply consequences if you leave: social fallout, financial instability, or emotional devastation. These threats can be overt or subtle, but they are designed to make independence feel dangerous. Guilt is layered. N through reminders of your compassion, your history together, or how much you have already invested. Obligation is invoked by framing your presence as essential to their survival or stability. What makes this phase particularly confusing is that these tactics can feel more real than earlier manipulation. The emotional tone is heightened, the language more intimate, the stakes seemingly higher. That intensity can be mistaken for sincerity. But intensity is not the same as authenticity. In fact, the more intense the manipulation becomes, the more likely it is driven by panic rather than care. These behaviors surface specifically when the narcissist realizes the dynamic is truly ending because earlier methods no longer work. Subtle gaslighting, intermittent reinforcement, and casual dismissiveness fail once you disengage. The system adapts by escalating. This is not evolution toward health. It is a stress response within a rigid psychological structure that cannot tolerate loss of company. Understanding this context matters because it reframes what you are experiencing. You are not being pulled back because the narcissist suddenly understands you. You are being pulled back because your absence threatens their sense of power and relevance. The clarity you feel is the very thing they are trying to destabilize, and the confusion you experience is not accidental. It is the product of carefully chosen emotional levers being pulled all at once. When fear, guilt, nostalgia, and obligation converge, it can feel overwhelming. That overwhelm is the point. It keeps you from fully trusting your own perception. Recognizing these tactics as last-ditch maneuvers rather than genuine connection allows you to see through the emotional fog. What looks like vulnerability is often strategy, and what feels like love resurfacing is more accurately a reaction to control slipping away when manipulation no longer works. When hoovering fails, vulnerability doesn't land, and fear no longer pulls you back. The narcissist often pivots to something far more corrosive: character assassination. This shift can feel abrupt and deeply violating, especially because it replaces moments of intimacy with acts of betrayal. But psychologically, this move serves a very specific function. If the narcissist cannot control you directly, they will attempt to control how others see you. Protecting the ego becomes less about reclaiming you and more about destroying your credibility. At the core of this strategy is the narcissist's need to preserve a superior self-image. Your autonomy threatens that image. If you leave with clarity and dignity, it suggests that the narcissist was not all-powerful, not indispensable, and not entitled to your loyalty. That implication is intolerable. So the narrative must change. You cannot be someone who made a healthy decision. You must be redefined as unstable, cruel, disloyal, or deceptive. By discrediting you, the narcissist protects the illusion of their innocence and dominance. Smear campaigns are a common tool in this phase. These may be overt or subtle, public or private. The narcissist may share selective stories with friends, family members, coworkers, or even strangers, framing themselves as the injured party. Facts are distorted, timelines rearranged, and context removed. Your boundaries are recast as abandonment. Your emotional responses are labeled as pathology. Your silence becomes proof of guilt. What makes these smears particularly effective is that they often contain fragments of truth, strategically twisted to support a false conclusion. Revisionist storytelling plays a major role here. The narcissist rewrites the history of the relationship in a way that absolves them of responsibility. Moments where you were hurt become moments where you were too sensitive. Patterns of control are reframed as concern. Abuse is minimized, justified, or erased altogether. In this revised version, they are consistently reasonable, generous, and misunderstood, while you are unpredictable, demanding, or ungrateful. This revision is not casual, it is rehearsed and repeated until it feels real to them. Projection is another central mechanism. Traits the narcissist cannot tolerate in themselves, manipulativeness, dishonesty, selfishness, cruelty, are assigned to you. This serves two purposes. Internally, it allows them to disown shame by locating it elsewhere. Externally, it primes others to view you through a distorted lens. If you try to speak your truth later, you may already be framed as unreliable. The narcissist's accusations become a preemptive strike against accountability. Victim narratives are especially powerful in recruiting allies. The narcissist may present themselves as confused, heartbroken, or blindsided by your behavior. They may emphasize how much they tried, how much they gave, and how unfairly they were treated in return. This narrative invites sympathy and loyalty from others, creating a protective buffer around the narcissist. It also isolates you. People who once felt neutral may now feel compelled to take sides, often without knowing the full story. What is crucial to understand is that this is not reactive anger or emotional overflow. It is strategy. The narcissist is not simply venting. They are managing perception. By controlling the narrative, they regain a sense of power. If they cannot dominate you privately, they will attempt to dominate your reputation. Autonomy is punished not through confrontation, but through erasure and distortion. For survivors, this phase can be profoundly shocking. The person who once claimed to love you now speaks about you with contempt or suspicion. Private vulnerabilities may be exposed or weaponized. Trust is replaced with suspicion, and warmth with calculation. This betrayal can feel more painful than the loss of the relationship itself, because it attacks not just the bond, but your sense of reality and safety. It is also deeply destabilizing because it often happens quietly behind your back. You may sense a shift in how others treat you without fully understanding why. This ambiguity can trigger self-doubt and a powerful urge to defend yourself. But engaging in the narrative battle often fuels the narcissist's agenda, reinforcing their position as the central figure in the drama. The distortion of truth in this phase serves one overarching goal: to maintain the narcissist's superiority and innocence. Reality must bend to support that goal. Your lived experience becomes inconvenient and therefore disposable. Recognizing this behavior as ego defense, not as an accurate reflection of who you are, can help ground you when the betrayal feels personal and incomprehensible. The shock survivors feel is valid. Intimacy creates an expectation of mutual care, even in endings. When that expectation is shattered by calculated harm, it can be disorienting and deeply painful. But this pivot toward character assassination is not a commentary on your worth or your truth. It is a signal that your independence has succeeded in ways the narcissist cannot tolerate, and that the only control left to them lies in distortion rather than connection. When overt manipulation and public narrative control no longer deliver results, many narcissists shift into a quieter but equally destructive phase: psychological sabotage through silence and withdrawal. This phase is often misunderstood because it lacks drama on the surface. There are no declarations, no visible attacks, no obvious confrontations. Instead, there is absence, and that absence is not accidental or benign. It is a deliberate tactic, designed to destabilize, punish, and regain control without appearing to do anything at all. Withdrawal in this context is not about self-regulation or emotional processing. It is strategic disengagement. The narcissist withholds contact, warmth, or acknowledgement as a way to create emotional disorientation. Messages go unanswered. Conversations end abruptly. Affection disappears without explanation. This sudden emotional vacuum is meant to provoke anxiety and confusion, especially in someone who has been conditioned to seek repair or clarity. The target is left scanning for meaning, replaying interactions, and questioning what they did wrong. Stonewalling often accompanies this withdrawal. Questions are ignored, concerns dismissed, and attempts at communication met with silence or minimal responses. This creates a power imbalance where the narcissist controls access to information and resolution. The lack of feedback becomes its own form of cruelty. Humans are wired to seek coherence and connection. When those are denied, distress increases. The narcissist exploits this biological and psychological need, using deprivation as leverage. Emotional cruelty in this phase is subtle but potent. It may show up as calculated indifference, where the narcissist appears unaffected, calm, or even cheerful while you are struggling. This contrast is intentional. By presenting themselves as unbothered, they invalidate your pain and reinforce the idea that your distress is excessive or unwarranted. This can trigger shame and self-doubt, pushing you to minimize your experience or seek their approval once again. Mixed signals are another hallmark of psychological sabotage. After prolonged silence, the narcissist may send a brief, neutral message or offer a fleeting interaction that hints at reconnection, just enough to reopen hope, but not enough to resolve anything. This intermittent contact keeps you emotionally tethered, oscillating between relief and despair. The inconsistency disrupts emotional regulation, making it difficult to detach or move forward. Silence in this context is not peace. It is aggression turned inward. It communicates dominance through deprivation. The Narcissist. EST is asserting control by deciding when and if you are worthy of attention. This is especially effective when other tools have failed, because it places the burden of emotional labor entirely on the target. You are left managing the fallout while the narcissist remains untouched. The psychological impact of this phase can be severe. Confusion breeds rumination. Rumination erodes clarity. Over time, self-trust weakens and the nervous system becomes dysregulated. The target may feel compelled to reach out, apologize, or abandon boundaries just to end the discomfort. That impulse is not weakness. It is a predictable response to prolonged uncertainty and emotional deprivation. The narcissist is counting on this collapse to pull you back into the dynamic. It is important to clarify that this behavior does not stem from emotional overwhelm or an inability to cope. Narcissists are capable of engagement when it serves them. The selective nature of their silence, how it appears when you ask, autonomy and disappears when control is regained, reveals its function. This is not avoidance, it is punishment. Entitlement plays a central role here. The narcissist believes they are justified in withholding because they perceive your independence as a transgression. Silence becomes a way to discipline you for stepping out of line. There is no curiosity about your experience, no concern for mutual understanding. Empathy is absent because the focus remains fixed on restoring a sense of superiority for those on the receiving. This phase can feel eerily calm yet deeply unsettling. The lack of overt conflict can make it harder to name the harm. You may question whether you are overreacting or imagining intent, but psychological sabotage does not require noise to be effective. Its power lies in its invisibility. Recognizing this pattern is essential because it reframes the silence. What appears as disengagement is actually control by other means. The discomfort you feel is not evidence that you need the narcissist. It is evidence that a system of emotional dependence is being deliberately activated. Understanding this can interrupt the cycle, allowing you to hold your ground even when the absence feels louder than any argument ever was. One of the most painful illusions survivors carry into the final stages of a narcissistic relationship is the hope for closure. The belief that if there could just be one honest conversation, one moment of mutual understanding, everything would make sense. This expectation is deeply human, but it collides with a psychological reality that makes closure from a narcissist not only unlikely, but impossible. What feels like a reasonable request to you registers to the narcissist as a threat to dominance. Closure requires accountability. It requires the capacity to reflect on one's impact, to tolerate discomfort, and to hold another person's emotional reality as valid even when it conflicts with your own. These are precisely the capacities narcissism undermines. The narcissistic system is organized around self-protection, not self-examination. When a relationship ends, that system is not oriented toward meaning-making or repair. It is oriented toward winning. Winning in this context does not mean resolution. It means control of the narrative and preservation of superiority. Any conversation that invites mutual understanding also invites vulnerability, and vulnerability is experienced by the narcissist as weakness. Rather than engaging in reflection, they default to defensiveness, minimization, or attack. This is why final conversations often feel surreal. The words may sound familiar, but the substance is hollow. Your feelings are dismissed, reframed, or weaponized. In these moments, survivors often encounter a chilling lack of empathy. Pain is met with indifference. Questions are answered with deflection. Attempts at clarity are met with gaslighting. You may leave the conversation feeling smaller, more confused, and less grounded than when you entered. This is not accidental. The narcissist is not seeking to understand you. They are seeking to destabilize you enough to regain the upper hand. Cruelty can also surface unexpectedly. Sarcasm, contempt, or emotional coldness may appear where you hoped for care. This cruelty serves a function. By invalidating your experience, the narcissist avoids facing it. By making you doubt your perceptions, they avoid responsibility. The conversation becomes less about closure and more about erasing your reality. What makes this particularly painful is that the narcissist may appear calm or rational while doing this. They may accuse you of being emotional, dramatic, or unreasonable for wanting answers. This reversal places you on the defensive, shifting focus away from the harm done and onto your reaction to it. The structure of the interaction ensures that you leave without resolution, often carrying more questions than before. Seeking understanding at this stage can be especially dangerous because it exposes you to renewed manipulation. The narcissist knows what you are hoping for, and they may exploit that hope by offering partial validation or fleeting insight, just enough to keep you engaged. These moments can feel promising, but they rarely lead anywhere. Instead, they reset the cycle, pulling you back into dialogue that drains clarity and reinforces self-doubt. It is important to recognize that the absence of closure is not a personal failure or an unfinished task. It is a structural feature of narcissistic dynamics. Closure would require the narcissist to relinquish the very defenses that define their psychological survival. Expecting that shift at the end of a relationship is like expecting someone to dismantle the only system they believe keeps them safe. This realization can be both painful and freeing. Painful because it shatters the hope for mutual understanding. Freeing because it redirects the work inward. Emotional closure is not something the narcissist can give you. It is something you build through awareness, validation, and self-trust. It emerges when you stop seeking answers from the person who distorted them and start grounding yourself in what you know to be true. Awareness becomes the anchor. Understanding the patterns, the manipulations, and the limitations allows you to stop personalizing the lack of resolution. You begin to see that the confusion was part of the system, not a reflection of your worth or intelligence. From that place, closure becomes less about explanation and more about acceptance. Dialogue with a narcissist at this stage often reopens wounds rather than healing them. Silence, distance, and internal processing offer more protection than one last conversation ever could. When you let go of the expectation that they will validate your experience, you reclaim authority over it. And in that reclamation, a different kind of closure begins to take shape, one grounded not in their acknowledgement, but in your own clarity and self-respect. Recognizing these final narcissistic tactics can feel unsettling at first, but it is also the moment where real safety and empowerment begin to take shape. Once you see the pattern, the confusion starts to loosen its grip. What once felt personal, chaotic, or uniquely painful begins to reveal itself as structured, predictable behavior driven by loss of control. That awareness matters because it shifts the focus away from trying to fix, explain, or confront, and toward protecting your psychological well-being. One of the hardest lessons in this phase is accepting that confrontation rarely brings relief. Calling out manipulation, demanding accountability, or defending your truth may feel justified, but it often keeps you entangled in the very dynamic you are trying to leave. Narcissistic systems thrive on engagement. Even negative attention can function as supply. Disengagement, on the other hand, removes the fuel. Boundaries, especially quiet, consistent ones, communicate something confrontation never can, that access to you is no longer guaranteed. Clarity becomes your strongest anchor. Not clarity about their intentions, which will continue to shift, but clarity about patterns. Promises may sound convincing. Apologies may feel sincere. Moments of kindness may stir hope. But patterns tell the real story. When behavior repeatedly contradicts words, behavior is the truth. Trusting that truth allows you to step out of the emotional fog and make decisions based on reality rather than potential. It is also important to reframe what you are witnessing. The narcissist's dirtiest final move, whether it is manipulation, character assassination, silence, or sabotage, is not a sign of strength. It is evidence of lost control. Healthy power does not require coercion, punishment, or distortion. When someone resorts to these tactics, it signals desperation, not dominance. Understanding this can help neutralize the fear these behaviors are meant to provoke. Choosing disengagement does not mean suppressing your feelings. Grief, anger, sadness, and relief can coexist. What disengagement means is that you stop offering those emotions to someone who uses them against you. You begin to process internally or with safe others, rather than seeking resolution from the source of harm. This shift protects your nervous system and restores a sense of agency that may have been eroded over time. Boundaries in this stage may feel uncomfortable, especially if you were conditioned to prioritize harmony or caretaking. You may worry about being seen as cold, unfair, or cruel. But boundaries are not punishment, they are protection. They are a response to repeated evidence that access to you was not handled with care. Holding a boundary does not require justification, it requires consistency. As clarity strengthens, the tactics that once destabilized you begin to lose their power. Silence no longer